the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behaviors so you won't click. No complicated code, just tried and true brain science at play. Social engineering for good, the best defense is in your mind today.
Welcome to Phishing for Answers. The opinions expressed here are solely those of the individuals involved and do not reflect the views of their employers. Get ready, because the next live episode of Phishing for Answers is starting right now with your host, Joshua Krumbaugh, the CEO of Fish Firewall.
Psychology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behavior so you won't click. Tick.
All right. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Phishing for Answers. Today, we're here with Eric Walters. He is the CISO over at Burns and McDonnell. Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a retired Marine officer. Spent 20 years in the Marine Corps. I did this IT thing. I was initially a enlisted guy and then became an officer along the way. And I've been here at Burns for almost 10 years now.
Congratulations. So Burns, they're in construction, right?
You're correct. We're an engineering, architecture, construction firm located here in the Kansas City, headquarters here in the Kansas City area. So we're a privately held, employee-owned company. So we've got about 100 locations around the world and in the United States. So,
wow, that's a lot to manage. Well, hey, so how'd you get into cybersecurity to begin with? Was it by accident? Was it when you were in the Marines?
It was while I was in the Marine Corps. I got a chance to go to the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, one of the best places in the world to live. I got to live there for 3 years. And while I was going to school, getting my master's degree, and I happened to have a space for a class and went to the registrar's office and heard this guy talking behind me. You need to take this hacking class. And I was like, ooh, hacking. What's that all about? And so I said, sign me up. And so that's how my adventure started in 2001 timeframe. And so I ended up getting a master's degree in cybersecurity, and then kind of went from there.
Well, congratulations. And you reminded me I need to submit a talk to the Insider Threat Summit because that's my excuse to go to Monterey every year. So,
Great place to go.
yeah, no, it's a great conference, actually. I've heard some interesting talks there. I think my favorite was it was a while back now. I guess this is dated, but it wasn't too long after the whole Snowden stuff happened, and they had Snowden's boss at the time giving a keynote. He was saying how horrible it was, but I'm like, yeah, but your keynote. So,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
exactly.
While I was in Monterey, I got to go to DEF CON a couple times. I was back in the old days of DEF CON.
Oh, where was it at?
So that was at the Alexis.
Okay.
When it was,
Lexus Park. Yeah.
it was one of the first ones, and it was pretty raunchy and fun. I'll just say that much. At the time, it was a little raw. Maybe that's a better word than raunchy. It was raw.
Yeah, I've noticed every time they change venue, it gets a little bit less raw. Like, I mean, I remember back at the what was it, Bally's or whatever. I mean, it was a great time. That was when it was the perfect size too. It was gigantic, but not so large that you had to wait 2 hours in line to go to one talk that was going to be 45 minutes. So,
Yeah, I was back in the days of the wall of shame and people
yes.
getting popped, and it was a fun time to be there.
I agree. I agree. I think we all have crazy DEF CON stories. I accidentally started a mini con there. Didn't even mean to.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was one. I don't even remember exactly how it started, but I'm a bit of a pepperhead, and so I had brought my pepper, I guess, combination with me, and I'm just putting it on everything, and it's ghost peppers and some of the
Okay.
hottest peppers in the world. Well, somehow we end up challenging somebody to do a pepper, and this just spreads really, really quickly. Next thing you know, there's 200 of us walking down the streets of Vegas, just peer pressuring everybody we see into eating so much hot pepper that they like rock in corners and cry. And what was funny is as soon as they would do it, like get over the pain from doing the challenge, they would immediately want to inflict it on other people. And that's how it grew so quickly. Well, the first year it had no name. I think the first 2 years it had no name because that we had so much fun the first year. Everyone's like, "Let's do it again." And that second year, even before we had a name, there was an academic researcher. We get published in a paper.
Oh, geez.
No, yeah, you can't make this stuff up. That's the great thing about DEF CON. Anyway, so we just celebrated PepperCon 9 this past year, had
Okay.
badges,
Wow.
everything. So yeah, it's crazy how those things happen. I don't even have to go anymore and it still happens on its own. So
Well, part of our leadership team here accepted a challenge in our United Way campaign to eat hot peppers, to go through the 10 levels of hot peppers. And I bowed out at 9 because,
was it the peanut challenge?
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I did that with my stepson. It was brutal.
Yes.
I did 10, but I regretted it. Almost threw up. I mean, it was bad.
Well, yeah. And people kept telling me that 10 wasn't as bad as 9 was. And I was like, okay, well,
I
I
don't
don't
know. They
know.
were both terrible. They were
Yes.
both terrible.
Yes. I agree with you 100%. So,
I mean, they're basically the same. It was just the amount of that coating that they had that was just pure pain.
yep,
So,
I agree.
okay, getting to the actual topic at hand here, security awareness. Since we mentioned the wall of shame right out of the gate, talking about DEF CON, maybe we should jump right into carrot versus stick.
Sure.
So, what is your opinion of doing a wall of shame in your company?
I haven't agreed with it, and simply
I don't
because,
either, by the way.
yeah, because I think in my mind, anyone can be had at any time, right? I got a great story. My team decided to see if they could get me from a phishing perspective, and so they spoofed our timesheet system. They then waited to Monday mornings when we have to approve them, saw me leave for another meeting, and then sent me a perfectly crafted email like the ones that we would get with saying someone has changed their time card.
Yeah, and did you click?
And so I absolutely clicked on it, and it was T. It had an S on the end of it instead of T sheet. It has T. It was a T sheets with an S. Well, I didn't see it because I was on. I was going to a meeting. I was irritated, honestly, that someone would change their time card at the last minute and force me to go back in and reapprove
Honestly, the
timesheets.
best way to get people to click, irritation.
Exactly. And so for me, I am very, I believe, savvy in understanding what to look for and when to click on it. As a matter of fact, in some of my training, I have said to people, if you weren't expecting the email and you don't know the person, don't click on it. Don't just delete
Yeah,
the email, right? Because you don't know who it is and you weren't expecting it. And so in this case, they perfectly spearfished me, right? They knew where I was going, what I was doing, how to get me. And so in my mind, the reason I don't agree with the stick is I believe anyone can be had at any time with enough time, effort, knowledge about you, that you can be had. And so therefore, if that's true about those of us that are in the profession, what does that mean to those people that aren't in the profession? So I
yeah.
think the carrot is absolutely way better than the stick in this scenario.
I only have one question. Did they
Okay,
get you to type in your password?
they did
Oh,
because
okay. They were
because
in there just screaming. The
oh, I was.
decibels
Well,
must
and
have
I
gone
got
through.
the whole skull and crossbones too that comes up afterwards, right? And I'm like, oh, you guys. And so I walked back into the area, and they were all just snickering because they knew they had gotten me. They was. I was like, "Yep, you got me. There's nothing I could do," because it looked perfect, right? I mean, it was
Yeah.
the exact scenario of, you put in your username, type in your password, didn't see the difference in the S on the end of the URL, and they got
I,
me.
I'm I mean, almost that exact same scenario. That, we've got a number of clients that try to be very proactive about their risks, and so it's a two-way street, particularly when you're doing security awareness with a company. The more we know about different tools and different processes, the more we can help you prevent or those types of threats. And so we had a company, they come in and they say, well, we're deploying Bamboo HR. There's a few processes we feel like could, make us susceptible to phishing, almost the exact same thing as you. So we go and we buy bamboo.com or bamboohr.com.co, like the best typo squatting domain you can get.
Exactly.
And, honestly, we had it forever. My salespeople had bamboo.com, email addresses for a while after we were done using it, just so that they could go get competitive marketing materials. It ended up getting, we ended up losing it, which happens often with some of the best typo squatting domains. But I bring it up because they had approached us, they told us about it, we emulated the threat, and then when they saw that same type of thing happen in the real world, they didn't fall for it. And
Yep.
I think that's one of those lessons that we forget too much in our security awareness programs, and that is that anything new that we do, anything existing that we're doing as a company could potentially be used against us. And the more that you can work with your partners or internally to simulate those types of threats, I think the better we can be at avoiding them.
Sure. Yep. I
Okay.
would agree.
So on carrot or stick, I completely agree. I think carrot is where is far more effective than stick. But what do you think about some of the more controversial policies like 3 strikes and you're out, or even just the remedial training? So now you click, we're going to make you go back through the 1 hour course,
Yeah,
or
I
whatever it
think,
happens to be.
as I'm sure we'll talk about, security awareness training isn't always focused on behavior modification, is like my CIO likes to say. Is we're trying to change behavior in the end, and if you can change behavior, then I ultimately think that the training itself. And whether or not it's 3 strikes or it's remedial training, the point is that if someone did something, then I take responsibility for not training them well enough and changing their behavior, right? So I truly believe it's not the end user's fault. Now, there are some people that are repetitive clickers, right? I will call, and they're just now. I also have to
I
understand
call them chronic clickers, but yeah.
chronic clickers. That in my industry, I'm in a construction industry, so some of times of my construction guys aren't as savvy with technology, and they're out in the field and they're looking at their phone and they get something that looks legitimate, and so therefore, I think I've actually done a disservice to them either by not training them properly or not by having the right technology in that's provided them an ability to see, hey, this is an email from someone on the outside that you normally don't get something from, right? And so, but unfortunately, I've got compliance requirements that I have to provide training. And yes, I think if someone does fail, providing them an education is what we should be doing. Hey, you clicked on this email, this phishing simulation email, and let me show you what you should have seen. Right. So
Yeah.
it's the education that's important to me in the remedial training, which I absolutely agree with, because people need to understand what they missed in a real world scenario. Right. That's what's important.
I do too, with one key exception, and the exception is I don't want the training to feel like punishment.
Correct.
So the way I try to approach it is more of a, well, first and foremost, I don't believe in exploiting users. So testing whether or not they'll type in their password, fun if it's your CISO. But in real, or if we're doing security awareness training or phishing for training purposes anyway, or for changing behavior, there really isn't much value that comes of it. And the reason I say that is because yes, it is valuable to know who will type in their credentials, but what's more valuable is the moment they learn or they realize their mistake, they are uniquely susceptible to learning, and if we can give them really good just-in-time training, that's not the typical
Right.
boring whatever. It says, "Listen, they're going to use urgency. They're going to use authority. Your boss won't ask for gift cards." Simple things like that that we can get ingrained more at a instinctual level, and I agree, we're trying to change behavior, and I think it comes with repetition and practice, which means we have to run simulations, but I think how we do it is really important too.
Yeah, I think the punitive part of someone failing actually causes just the opposite, right? I mean, if you just look at training dogs, for instance, and I won't relate dogs to children, but many many times you have to tell dogs or pets and children to not do things a numerous set of times, and they have to sometimes understand the pain. Is don't touch the hot stove, don't touch the
Yep,
hot stove. You touch the hot stove, you don't touch the hot stove again the next time because you kind of learned from that perspective.
yeah,
And so I do think there, to your point, it is repetitive, but it's repetitive about doing the right thing, not
yeah.
about doing the wrong thing from that perspective.
I agree, and I think it's more about catching them doing things right and
Yes.
praising them when they do it right
Yeah.
versus catching them doing it wrong and telling them they're doing it wrong.
Yep.
Both are important, but I would hope in any, well-established or mature enough program that it's like 99% to 1% where almost all of it is more, that a boy, great job, the attaboys. But I do think giving users praise is really key. And actually, that brings up another really good topic, which is gamification. So, gamification is often talked about, often used, I think sometimes less effectively than others. Gamification is one of those areas where it's definitely there's a lot of variance, and that variance can really make it very effective or very ineffective, just depending on their approach. But what are your thoughts on gamification?
So I think that gamification is it uses kind of the identical elements principle, right? Which basically says that learning's easier when the training is similar to the performance environment, right? Meaning that if I make my game very similar to what I'm going to see in the real world, or in
Yes.
when I'm doing my actual job, and so to take a finance person, for instance, if I'm gamifying them that they're getting invoices or they're getting something else that a finance person would get, then they're going to understand that. So I think gamification is great when it's really related to a role-based function that the person is doing. I think if you try and gamify it and it's not relevant to them, then I don't think it's as effective.
There's a lot to unpack with what you just said there, but, I agree with everything you said, and if I gave away trophies to guests on the show, you would get one because you're the first one that has ever, brought up identical elements, and I think that this is one of the most critical behavioral science principles that can be applied to cybersecurity. Um, the large reason is I see it as a way to plant human virus definitions. The classic example of identical elements is where you buy a new car, you drive it down the road, and you start seeing it everywhere.
Yep.
Well, what if instead of having it be that new car, it's urgency or it's authority or it's gift cards
Yep.
or it's the many different things that they're going to see. But really, there's what, 20 different common cognitive biases that are used. So it's not that many different things that we really have to get the user aware of to really start changing that behavior and getting better results. And then the other thing that you were talking about was making it contextual to their role. So I'm a massive fan of role-based training because there was a study done that found that when it's contextual to somebody's role, like you were talking about there, that it's 15x more effective,
Mhm.
15 times more effective. And it makes sense because generic training that's about some generic risk doesn't connect. it's not a risk that I'm going to face. But now when it's connected to my job and my everyday role, it connects and it clicks, I
That's
think,
right.
for a lot more people.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
I also think that that's the reason that we want to encourage them to take it home, and we wanna give them tools to take home to their, elderly parents, to their children, talking about cybersecurity, because I think that's the other place where we can connect it and really, really get them more emotionally involved. And when they go home and they teach their children or their wife or their parents about cybersecurity, they become the expert at home.
Yeah, I heard a acronym once, and it was called TREAT. Basically, timely, relevant, engaging, accessible, and terse. And I think that engaging and relevant are so true with what you were just saying, because
Yeah.
if it's relevant to me at home, then the likelihood is that I'm going to take it to work, right?
Yeah.
If I can make it associated to, like you said, your grandparents or my kids or something like that, and then to your point, it's got to be engaging. It's got to be
Yep.
that gamification, I think, is the piece. If it's engaging and if it's associated to my job or my life in some way, then I'm going to connect with it more and be able to, actually change my behavior. Again, we're trying to, that's the whole point, right? Is I'm
Yeah.
trying to not get you to click or not get you to do this or not get you to do whatever, but I want to change your behavior because you understand the why behind it, not oh, well, they're just telling me never to click on this stuff. No, I don't want to do this because it affects the company and it's this and that and the other. So
Yeah.
that's my belief.
Yeah. And I think another element there is that some of the most common training or advice that we ever give in cybersecurity, hover, don't forget to hover,
Yep.
is actually terrible advice for the typical blue collar employee who's only ever going to check their email on their phone.
Yeah.
There is, I guess there are technically ways to hover now, finally, but they're not very good. They're not very effective. And honestly, telling people to hover if they're in a completely mobile environment is not good advice, in my opinion. And I think that just goes to we have to be aware of their role, how they're going to access the training, how they're going to put us at risk, and the training needs to be appropriate to that.
Yep.
So, to that, I have a question.
Okay.
We can't cover every role. So what roles are most important?
Wow. So I think you have to go back and you have to consider, at least in my mind, where is it that your company makes your money, right? And so you have to kind of assess what is going to hurt me. I hate to say it this way, but what's going to affect me? What's going to hurt me the most should that happen? Clearly, we think finance. Clearly, we think HR from a employee records perspective. But you have to also, and maybe R&D, if you're in that environment, and what data, it goes back to the crown jewels, but how do I get to that from that perspective? So I think clearly understanding where you make your money is probably the first thing, and making sure that I have trained those people in those things. We definitely don't want business email compromises, right? Where, the finance people get an invoice from a completely typo squatted area and they're starting to pay those from that perspective. But we also need to be sensitive to the data that my company has and how are they going to get to that.
Yeah.
So I think it's initially those people in those sensitive type areas. But I think developers are one of the biggest areas where we have problems, right?
Oh,
Because
absolutely. They love to click. They're as bad as salespeople.
they, they are, and I get that they want to get their job done, and so building that security acumen into those developers from the very beginning,
Yeah.
right, is what's important. And so I think those sensitive roles, your administrators, making sure that they're very well knowledge, and it's not just the administrators in IT, it's the administrators of some of your applications, because I know
Yeah.
we do a very good job from a SSO perspective with authentication side of it, people getting to an application. But when you get to the authorization side, what they can do within the application, many times it's the business that's running that application as to
Yeah.
who can do what in the application. And so those people, even in the business, that are those administrators of those applications that the business uses, need to understand what their role is in this process.
Yeah. I believe that every organization at minimal should have a uh, what I like to call sensitive information users group, where
Mhm.
it's any level of sensitive access and it's simple training. Listen, with great power comes great responsibility. You are a target. Be careful.
Yep.
That's it. That's about all they really need to know, but you need to remind them. Uh, early on in early days of Fish Firewall, we were able to convince one of our financial institutions that we were working with to give us some enhanced demographic data. And so we had everything from age to gender to, um, you know, sensitive information users and things like that, right? And what we found was that over, let me rephrase this, that the people with a high amount of access, and it was just in this environment, but we saw it in some others too, and so I think it's probably something that's very common, actually presented almost double the risk of the average user. So if you had, let's say 5% of your people clicking on fish, well, that was a disproportionate amount of those clicks were coming from your highly privileged users. And so that's part of the reason these people have to be trained, because I think we take it for granted that, somebody in HR or finance that has a high amount of access is going to, protect it. And I think most people don't realize, they're not aware of how much they need to protect, and the things that they need to do to protect it.
Yep. I would agree 100%.
So, in building out these programs, particularly with some of those users that are, are not on a computer, are, not working with electronics on a day-to-day basis, so it's a little bit more rare. Um, do you have any tips for best practices to actually get those people to engage? Because I think that's an area that a lot of organizations struggle.
Well, I'm going to say something a little controversial, in
I
that
love controversial things.
good. In that, especially for me and those people that are not in offices, and I have a lot of those people in my company, I believe that it's actually, and I think I said this earlier, it's more my role to protect them. From this perspective. And so I think for them, investing in technology is actually a better way to use my limited funds than trying to train them, because they're not in an office. They're not seeing the things that we see. They're only on their phones, to your point, and they're very quick and they're looking at things. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting this change for this RFI request for information, or request for change of some sort, and they need that information really fast. So I
Yeah.
believe that it's really more my responsibility to ensure that the technology is there to lessen the burden on them, and that I don't have to give them as much training from that perspective.
Oh, I actually completely agree. And I think that one of the things that we need to be doing a lot more often is putting mitigating controls around people. For example, the person that is in the field needs the quick access to the data. They only need access to very specific portions. They're not touching most of our systems, which means we need limited technologies around them. But MDM goes a long way in helping to protect somebody that is always going to be connecting on mobile. And so there's those investments like that. But the other thing I think we can do more of is when we understand, we talked about chronic clickers earlier. We know who our chronic clickers are most of the time. Why not have mitigating controls around them so that they can, click, if they want to be a chronic clicker, great. You just have more security around you than everybody else has around them. And it's not a punishment. It's just, well, until we can get this problem resolved, we have to have additional.
Well, I'm going to suggest that it maybe not even be a problem, right? It's a function of their job, their environment, what
Sometimes
they
it is,
do
yeah.
from that perspective, right? And it's just typical, right? So if I think about a
Yep.
construction site, I can do the best job in the world in protecting the digital plans while they're in my environment and in the office environment, and we're creating these plans and drawings and blueprints and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then what happens when it goes out to the job?
They're sitting on an iPad that's left unlocked on a table.
Well, maybe not even an iPad. They're probably even going to the local Kinko's and printing it out, and now it's all over the place, right?
That's
And so
fair.
now you have a hard copy, a physical copy of what I protected from a digital perspective. So I think we have to understand what are we trying to protect and provide the right amount of protection for those. So if I have a construction guy who's using email on his phone, okay, let's provide the protections around him for that, and treat him in that way. And so I appreciated the fact that you said, hey, your protections might be different because of what you're doing than someone else. But I ultimately don't see that as a problem. I see that as a challenge for me to understand my business well enough that I provide the right controls.
Oh, I agree. And I think when you do it that way, you can, actually make the experience even a lot nicer for a
Correct.
majority of your users.
Yep.
When it's more adaptive based on the individual risk, means you have the controls where they need to be, but you don't have them where they don't need to be. And
Right.
I think too often, there's a lot of controls that are in places they don't need to be, and this is another controversial thing maybe in cybersecurity, but too much security turns users away from us. It makes them hate us. It makes them not want to bring us in, and that causes the shadow IT incidents where we have something out here on our perimeter, and all of a sudden we run a vulnerability scan. We've got a critical, and we're wondering why we never heard about this thing that was put out
Right.
onto our perimeter.
Yeah, over the last 10 years, I've been here, I've tried to change the narrative of the information security department from the department of no, N-O, to actually the department of no, K-N-O-W. If you tell me what's going on, if I know what's going on, we can protect it. But when you hide
Yeah,
it from me because you want to see that I'm going to tell you, the guy that's going to tell you no, well, that actually makes us less secure as a company overall. So
yeah.
tell me as much as you want to tell me, and we'll work through how we want to protect that. Right? Don't go hide things from me, because we can work together to make sure that it's easy for your people, and secure for the company.
To that, I actually talked to a CISO the other day that they had a group, one of their departments come and they say, "Well, we want this technology." The security review comes through and the vendor failed miserably. But because they're not the department of no, and they saw the value that this product would bring to the organization, the cybersecurity team actually was working with the vendor to help them get to a point where they could be approved. And I
Yes.
think that's more of how we need to be doing this.
Right.
And it doesn't have to always be binary, yes or no. It can be, well, hey, we want to work with you, but we're gonna need you to do X, Y, and Z before we can.
Right. Well, and I think when we think about technologies, right, if I think about, as you mentioned earlier, phishing's the number one attack vector for that's out there nowadays, right? It's the number
Globally,
one way that.
anywhere. It's the biggest threat we all face.
Right, exactly. And so if we think about, okay, how do you shut that down from a technology perspective? Clearly, MFA is one of the ways that are out there, but we all know that there's an MFA bypass
Yeah.
technology now, right? They
Honestly,
can.
just, authorization phishing, which is what so many people do.
Yeah, exactly. And so I can bypass your control that you think is the panacea MFA that everyone says turn on and now you're protected. Well, no, that's not true anymore. So
You're
what do we
more
do?
protected.
We're more protected. Okay, you're right.
Yes.
And so what do we do? Do we go down the YubiKey route or the hard token route, to try and
I like
stop that?
passive.
Because but that's cost effective, especially if I'm in an engineer or construction area where people are going to lose things, right? And so I got to replace those, and that's great for the office people, but maybe not the other side of things. So that's
Yeah.
not necessarily the answer. I could go down trusted device enrollment, where I say, okay, you can only come from one of the devices that I have said that you can come from. Well, that's great, but now that means I have to own all the phones, I have to own all the iPads, I have to provide. So I can't now administratively or cost effectively have people use a BYOD thing because I now need that. Well, I could probably
Yeah.
register them, but now I'm going to put some policies on there. I can go down the containerization route and all of that. And so I can put those controls in place, but there's a cost to that, right? And
Yeah.
so I can stop phishing, but boy, I changed culture in my environment and I changed the technology. And I mean, to your point earlier, am I going to make it too hard for the employees to actually want to use it, even though it's a benefit for everyone?
So Win Schwartau wrote this book called Analog Security, and one of the things he talks about in there that really resonated with me is how in we may be in a digital area, but most of what we do as cybersecurity professionals is not digital. It's not binary. And so each and every layer is meant to stop as much as it possibly can, driving as close to one or as close to zero as possible. But the absolutes are really not a reality. You
Yeah.
put in MFA, there's a million ways around it that we're all, well, maybe not a million, but there's plenty of ways around it that we're all aware
There's a
of.
few.
Yes, exactly. And so that is to me why we do layers and why one of those layers has to be making sure that the employees do have those really good instincts built in so that they're avoiding these things. But it's not just that because, like you said, people can fall for it. So we want those compensating controls in place. And I think you get enough layers, you can prevent most attacks. But no layer is going to be effective in and of itself. I wish there was. And if anyone ever actually does invent the magic box, well, no one will believe them. They'll go out of business before it ever gets sold.
Well,
But if they did,
Well, and technologies are always changing. The bad guys always coming up with something new, right?
they are.
The security vendors are trying to keep up with them, but the technology vendors are constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And with whatever, whether it's poor development practices or it's just a miss or something like that, there's always holes. And so
Hmm.
you can't protect from what you don't know that's going to happen in the future. So I can get as close to absolute as possible, and then it changes on me and
Yeah.
now I'm farther
Honestly,
away from it.
that is one of the things that I'm the most excited about with AI. What is the best thing that we can do to prevent the bad guys from actually being successful and having that ransomware incident or getting their hands on our money or our intellectual property? I think that one of the most effective things that we can do is just simply to harden our people, harden our systems, harden our devices, harden our networks. And all of these things need to be continuously done. And when I look at AI, I see that as one of those things that can just continuously be looking at everything, suggesting ways to continuously harden and improve. But it's one of those underrated things in cybersecurity. If you follow the CIS or the NIST controls and you
Yep.
deploy them in your organization, you will stop most of those zero-day threats. The part that they don't tell you about the 0 days is that most of them rely on default settings. Almost all of them
Right.
rely on default
Yeah, it's amazing. I think where if you just do the basics, right? I mean, if you go
settings.
back to the CIS top 20 or what used to be called SANS top 20 or whatever, one of the top two are know what software you have, know what hardware you have, and if we just understood that, right? I go back to my know principle versus the KNOW is if I know what's there, I can go protect that stuff and I can go patch it and I can harden it and so on and so forth. And
Yeah.
in the end, it really does come back to basics.
Oh, absolutely. And I can't tell you to the point of know what's on your network. How many times we would start a pen test kickoff, ask them how many, servers they had in their environment, how many endpoints, and they would so often it would be around 10% of what was actually there would be the numbers that we got. So if they said they had 2,500, we would find 25,000. And I mean, maybe that's an extreme example, but it was pretty common that people really didn't understand everything that was sitting on their networks. And I think that that's, inventory of everything, and that includes your people and their vulnerabilities. Is it's a critical part of cybersecurity is just knowing what's going on. That's why I like what you said, the Department of No, KMOW. I'm gonna steal that shamelessly.
I don't know if I coined it or not, but it's worked for me over the last 10 years that's been here. So
Well, I like it. So we are running low on time here. What advice do you have, just any advice at all for our listeners that are trying to build a more secure culture?
I'm going to continue with my theme of no. I think it's really about understanding your business and understanding what that data is that's critical and being able to protect that first and foremost. I think people are always going to be our weakest link because they can be fooled just like I was fooled that we talked about in the very beginning with it. And if a cybersecurity professional can be fooled, well, then that doesn't bode well for us across the scenario. And so I think it's about understanding, knowing what the business is doing, and really. We can't just sit back and say, well, I'm just going to protect the shell. We have to protect the innards also. And knowing what people have is the way you do that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, and I actually fell for a phishing attack myself one time. It was a non-traditional first time I'd seen it. Uh, the nation states will inject stuff into Google so that it's only going to show up if you have a Google alert. And so I get this Google alert. It has my name in it. It's one of the talks that I had given at a conference, and so I just click on it to see what they're talking about. And, unfortunately, my web filter blocked it and said, "Hey, this is malicious." And I start looking and, from both, in both Chinese and Russian, I found for all of the popular cybersecurity speakers, there were these malicious sites embedded at the very bottom of
Wow.
Google. And it was the web filter that prevented me from falling for it. But they get creative, and I think that's part of the point is that we have to adapt, our training has to adapt to make sure that our people know about the latest techniques. Just the other day, I had a comment on YouTube well, one of the podcasts, and this guy says, "Hey, thanks, that was really great information. I'm trying to move my wallet to a different crypto exchange. Here's my password. Could you help me move it?" So I log in and there's $8,000 in there. And so I go to my friends and I'm like, "I know this is a scam. How does it work?" And they're like, "Well, if you try to move money, it's not going to let you. And it's going to say that there's a minimum $10,000 balance to move money. And so when you put in the extra
2,000
$2,000,
improvement. Yeah.
it's gone." And I'm like, so now the pretext is that you are breaking the law and stealing from somebody, and people believe it even more. So I mean, it's just it's
Well, I know
impressive what they do.
it is. I know my team's been dealing with the latest one, the CAPTCHA that are out there issues. So you get a CAPTCHA and you click on the things, and then when you hit OK, it basically takes some PowerShell commands, puts it on your computer, opens up your command prompt, enters these credentials, and basically gives them a remote access to your machine.
I've heard about that one, and that's nasty,
Yeah,
nasty.
and who's gonna think that a CAPTCHA page that you see all the time is going to be maliciously, encoded to go do these things? And when you think that you're clicking OK to the I picked the right lights
Yeah,
or sidewalks or whatever, when you hit the button, you are in essence allowing the command to
approving
run.
it. Yeah. Wow. No, I mean, I think that's all of these phishing attacks. They're endlessly getting more and more.
They are.
Uh, Sophisticated. I'm convinced that they've already got AI behind it, because it's just too quick. You update your LinkedIn profile and instantly you're getting phished. It really takes 10 minutes, no more, from the time that you do it to the time that you start getting attacked. So
Yep.
But I also think that's part of the training is that your people need to know the more public they are, the more they're going to be attacked, particularly with sites like LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. It's a great tool, but it also is the source of most business email compromises, in my opinion.
Yep. I would agree.
Well, hey, this has been an awesome episode. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
All right. Everybody, have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow for another episode.
Go Chiefs.